Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Today, the results are in after the Kashmir elections and unsurprisingly highlight the rather insidious agenda unfolding across northwest India. The family of Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra speak out aggressively against the Indian Film Censorship Board about their outrageous demands on the new film covering his life. We'll report on the Chennai air show catastrophe and the social media frenzy around government failures, and a race hate crime that never was. All of that and more coming up on today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. Thanks for putting some posts up. I saw that people are sharing their locations with us, so please keep it up. We'd love to know where it is that you are joining us from.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at lots of your great comments which have been filling up below the video, so thanks as always for those. Okay, James, let's get going. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
It was a deadly weekend, and what was supposed to be a world record-breaking air show turned out to be that and more. Unfortunately, the records being broken also were the contributing factors to the deaths and hospitalizations. Now, at the Chennai air show, the government is under scrutiny because of the fact that there were deaths. It was poorly managed in terms of the traffic flow and people flow. The air show saw between 1.2 and 1.3 million spectators, which is just phenomenal when the show hasn't happened for several years. The problem being is that in the nearby stadium, after even a busy cricket match of 40,000 spectators, it takes over an hour to clear people out. And what happened over the weekend was that they just didn't have the ability for people to leave. And it ended up being such a large mass of people that people were getting crowded. They were getting just overheated in the extreme heats with no cooling stations and no ability to actually get out of the crowd to cool themselves down in an open area because there were none. And at this time, I mean, as I said, it was a record-breaking crowd and it should have been such an amazing event to celebrate. But instead, in addition to 5 people being killed, another 112 were actually admitted to local hospitals or treated with heat exhaustion and exposure to the sun and the heat. So it was very poorly organized from many accounts. However, the government is fighting back, saying that they gave over and above what the Air Force had requested in terms of resources and staffing, volunteers, and so forth. It is just a sad, sad day to see that so many lives were lost and so many people were impacted on what should have been a major family, fun, exciting event that brought people together. And, it's just a shame. You can see the photos on the screen here of some of the crowds. And by the time it actually started, it was just shoulder to shoulder. It just was such a sad event. They went from about 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. or around that local time. So they did try to wrap it up before the heat or the height of the heat in the summer sun, and so to speak. But again, it still was just not enough to save lives and to prevent people from being overcome from the heat. So there's going to be a lot of inquiries. There's going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered. And it just takes, that one forethought of how do we get the traffic flowing? How do we get people to exit in an orderly fashion, but where they're not crowded so much that they overheat and just pass out in the crowd? And that was the other concern and contributing factor, was that when people did drop from the heat, of course, the first responders and emergency personnel were not even able to get to them in a quick fashion. So that created even more of a bottleneck and more of a problem with the crowd, Angus. It just was, as I said, should have been such an exciting and happy day that it turned out to be just a tragic one.
Yeah, it is. It's a horrible thing to report on, and unfortunately, large-scale events require large-scale administration and control. Excuse me. We have had here in the UK, we've had many events in decades past where we've had crowd control issues and people have died, and we had a very famous one at a football match some time ago when many people were died. Basically, they were killed in the crush. And unfortunately, lessons are only learnt afterwards when people die. And crowd control is a massive science in many ways. And of course, when you're administering a country the size of India, with a populace so huge, 1.4 billion people, of course, you are going to have events, large-scale events, that will attract large amounts of people. And you get an air show, which traditionally do attract large amounts of people, purely because of the nature of what they are. They can be seen over a very wide area. And if you've got a crowd of over 1 million people, I mean, apart from the fact that's almost unimaginable to us people here in Europe, to control 1 million people requires an enormous amount of resources, logistics, planning and control. And clearly the Indian government are just not equipped to do this. Even local, this is not even a local government level issue. It's a national government issue. If you're getting gatherings of people of up to 1 million people, that can only be controlled and resourced by central government. It's a massive undertaking, as so many governments have certainly learnt over here in the West. Whether it's through football matches, pop events, we've had pop concerts with the same sorts of issues. Controlling people are a movie. It almost comes down to fluid dynamics. It is a science, and it requires a huge amount of understanding and experience. And this needs to be rolled out in terms of actual on-the-ground people and operations. And clearly they have failed. The one big thing that the Indian government are going to have to take from this is not just a lesson learned. They absolutely have to act on this. If people are dying, and one can say it was fortunate it was only 5 people, I mean, that's tragic enough, but it's very easy in a crowd of this size to literally lose hundreds of people, as has happened on many occasions around the world in third world countries where there's been large gatherings, political or otherwise. Large amounts of people can die very easily and very quickly, and it does require a huge amount of resources and control to avoid that. Unfortunately, yes, I think the buck stops with the Indian government. They are going to have to take a bit more of a responsibility for this, James, and it's only a matter of time, sadly, before worse events than this are reported on.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, the government in India, something I've noticed is that when there are lives lost, they're quick to throw money at people. And I don't know if that's a way of trying to hush things up. The families of the 5 who are deceased received 5 lakh in a quick payment. But again, is that taking away from their ability to get proper compensation later? Because I mean, funerals and burials and all of these things take money. And, the loss of life is something that's ongoing forever. I mean, it's not just, for a quick cash grab for, government to throw money at. And that's something I've noticed a lot of, is that when things do happen, they just throw it at them. And yeah, I mean, they had 40 ambulances, they had nurses, they had doctors, they had other first responders on site. But for a crowd of, 1.2, 1.3 million, 40 ambulances really is not a lot when you're in the midst of such extreme heats, and just anything could go wrong, especially, like it could have been a plane crash, it could have been a failure. 40 ambulances sounds like a lot, but it really isn't in the big picture, Angus.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, for example, as I referred to a football match, we had a football match here some time ago where over 100 people were crushed to death. Now, 40 ambulances, if you're even putting 2 people in each ambulance, that still doesn't even cover 100 people, and that's just those who are not injured. It's very easy, as I say, for hundreds of people to be killed in an event like this in literally in the blink of an eye. I talk about fluid dynamics. It is essentially crowds are fluid; they can move very quickly, and crushes can happen very quickly. It's very easy. If you've got over 1 million people, you can have 100,000 people injured in the blink of an eye. Now, 40 ambulances, James, is isn't even going to touch the surface of that. So again, it's a lack of forethought, a lack of planning, and clearly on the day a lack of control. It's, as I say, it's only a matter of time before one of these events turns into a massive catastrophic disaster.
Yeah, it's just sad to see what should have been a happy, enjoyable day for everyone. But as we move along here, Angus, we're going to take a look at a racial attack where a student at Gettysburg College in the US was actually attacked and had racial slurs scratched right into his chest. This made international news. It was all over, social media. It was trending everywhere, and it turns out that he had done it to himself. It was not even a racial attack. It was done by himself. For what reason, I have no idea. That hasn't come out yet. But this, as I said, took flight, this whole story, in an international way. And yet it didn't happen. And it was, a swim team gathering, and whether or not there was alcohol involved, we don't know. But this young man who was African American, and it turned out that he claimed the perpetrators and people that he trusted actually used a box cutter to cut the N-word into his chest. They also said that he was the only person of color at the gathering. And for some reason, it's now come out that he did not actually get attacked by the other members of the swim team. It turns out that he had done it to himself and blamed it on all of the others that were there. And for that, it has created an uproar, because in the time that lapsed between when it happened and when he actually came clean about it, there was quite some time that went by. So the community, the law enforcement, the nation was just at odds with each other because of such a heinous and vicious attack that never even happened, Angus. It really is something that's going to impact a lot of communities, because when people are victimized, and I see, in the media all the time, and we hear about it, real events where people are truly victimized. And now, are they going to be second guessed? Are people going to look at them and wonder if they've inflicted it themselves or made up these stories? I mean, it has such far and devastating impacts and reach that, this youth, or this young adult, has no idea the damage that he has done to the psyche of others who are victimized and want to speak out, but now they're going to be afraid because they're going to think people are looking at them and judging them and trying to blame them as not really a victim.
Yes, I would call this the foolishness of youth. Clearly, this young lad had issues, and unfortunately, the impact is a lot greater than he realises. And unfortunately, I think the full force of the law really needs to come tumbling down on this young lad, if nothing else, to set an example. Because, why did he do it? Well, one can only speculate. It's, if he's a young man, maybe there was a deficit of attention. Maybe he felt a bit left out. He felt a bit ostracised. He just wanted to have a bit of attention or whatever. But whatever the motive, unfortunately, his methodology to achieve attention has had a dreadful impact on a wider social sphere, simply because, as you rightly point out, James, is that now, the whole issue of racial slurs, racial smears, race hate attacks, things like this, is a very emotive issue. And it's an issue that has been, of course, and unsurprisingly, taken extremely seriously right across Western society. It is trying to be stamped out wherever it appears. And there's a huge positive shift of momentum in society now to stamp out racism wherever it appears. And that battle is being won. However, when we get silly issues like this, a young, immature idiot who does something like this for whatever his reasons, he sets back this positive progress. Because, as you rightly say, people are going to say, well, was this attack, when the next one that happens, was it genuine? Was it self-inflicted? It's injecting that element of doubt into anything that can happen. So, of course, genuine victims of race hate attacks have now had their credibility, by extension, undermined by this one silly incident. So, yeah, James, unfortunately, for whatever silly reasons this lad has done this, I think an example really needs to be set of him. I think he really needs to face a pretty unpleasant punishment. I mean, punishment enough is self-inflicting himself with a box cutter. One can only imagine the mental issues that this young lad must have to inflict that upon himself. But unfortunately, he does need to be made an example of legally and publicly, and most importantly, publicly, because a message does need to be sent out right across all communities that if you do a stupid act like this, all you are doing is damaging the wonderful progress that has been made against race hate crimes widely across society. So yeah, James, it is worth highlighting issues like this. It is ironically a false flag, self-inflicted, stupidly, but it does have a wider and more dangerous impact.
Absolutely, and it undoes a lot that Gettysburg College has been doing over the years to make sure that they have a safe and inclusive campus. And I mean, they've gone a long way above and beyond what a lot of colleges do to make sure people feel safe, to make sure people feel like they fit in, and to make sure people feel included in the campus as a community. So it just, it's, as I said, it's heartbreaking to see that he was in a position where he felt so alone that he needed to get that attention. But at the end of the day, what he did was inexcusable. To blame his teammates for something that he inflicted on himself. It's just, a horrible situation all the way around, Angus.
Yeah, indeed. Well, as we say, let's hope it is publicly and widely spread, this story, so that it deters anybody else with the same issues. But anyway, okay, let's move on and change subjects completely, and let's move all the way across to the eastern hemisphere of the planet, Kashmir. Yes, the elections in Kashmir that we've reported on in recent times have been unfolding over recent weeks. The results are in, and it's brought in some interesting results, but of course it has actually, I suppose, peeled back the layers and revealed many of the issues, not just bubbling there, but I think almost predictable outcomes of what this so-called election was going to release. So in Indian-administered Kashmir yesterday, the election results were announced. It has elected its first government since, of course, the territory was brought under New Delhi's direct control back in 2019, as voters have backed opposition parties to lead its regional assembly. Now, of course, as I said, Modi's government cancelled Kashmir's partial autonomy, which was granted to them under a reserve status under India's very own constitution back in 2019. And it was a sudden decision that was subsequently endorsed by the Supreme Court, or shall we say rubber stamped by the Supreme Court. And it was accompanied by, at the time, mass arrests. Many of the local political leaders were placed under immediate arrest, and a months-long communication blackout was unfolded. So at the time, it was an absolute democratic outrage. Now, since then, the Muslim majority territory of around 12 million people, that's of course divided between India and Pakistan, who both claim in full the whole majority, it has not had an elected government. And in the meantime, it's actually been ruled by a governor appointed by New Delhi. So essentially it has been under central control from New Delhi, which has pretty much upset most of the resident population since 2019. Now, while voters took part in national elections in June, when Modi won a third term in power, these were the first local elections since 2014. So that's 10 years that the territory has not had a democratically elected local governance. Now, as results were announced, with an alliance in the opposition National Conference, NC, and Congress parties tipped to form a government, supporters celebrated. So by mid-afternoon, Election Commission figures showed NC and Congress had won 47 out of 90 seats in the Assembly. That's just over half. That was an unassailable lead over the BJP, Modi's BJP, who ended up with 27 seats. Some have called the vote a de facto referendum on the federal government's decision to repeal the territory's special status. Social activist local in the area, Iqbal Ahmad Bhatt, has said and is quoted as saying the people have given their judgment against what New Delhi did. So clearly the people have spoken in Kashmir and said, we totally reject Narendra Modi, we reject the BJP, and we reject everything that has been imposed upon us since 2019. That's democracy in action. And of course, 500,000 Indian troops are deployed in this area, who claim they're battling this 35-year insurgency in which, of course, tens of thousands of civilians, soldiers, militants, rebels have been killed, including dozens already this year. And another local activist, Jahangir Ahmad, said, we're happy with the election results. We hope that the political rights will be restored. And he was amongst the cheering crowd standing outside the home of the territory's expected new Chief Minister, NC leader Omar Abdullah. Now, Farooq Abdullah, his father and NC president, told reporters that the results were, once again, a verdict against Narendra Modi's government. Critics, however, say that the Assembly will only have nominal powers over education and culture. And in fact, New Delhi will also have the power to override legislation and will continue to appoint the governor. So basically, the critics, and what a lot of people have pointed out here, is that this is democracy in name only, because in reality, this new elected assembly will only have very limited powers, and they're talking about over education and culture. Now, of course, they are two important areas, but compared to local politics and the main issues of economy and law enforcement, things like the really important issues, certainly those related to running a democratic society, those are still controlled by central government, by the BJP. And the governor himself, the overriding decision maker, the local governor, is going to be appointed by the Modi's BJP. So the whole concept of democracy in Kashmir is ultimately a bit of a farce. It's paying lip service to democracy. And in reality, the practical running of Kashmir is still essentially, there's no change here. It's, as I say, it's window dressing, as we call it. Now, the BJP won seats in the southern Hindu-majority Jammu region and fought only from about a third of the seats in the Kashmir Valley. So basically, the BJP only fought in areas that they realised that they had a chance of winning. And of course, that was in the Hindu-majority Jammu region. And again, we talked about colonialisation. And again, this is part of this insidious agenda that's rolling across the Punjab as well, where the BJP over the last decade and a half have very deliberately allowed this agenda of outsiders, particularly Hindus, being allowed to come into J&K and buy up land and essentially colonise the region. And of course, what that means is when you have an influx of Hindus into the area, of course, they all have a vote. And that means that the Hindus, when it comes to so-called democratic elections, the Hindus' voice becomes more powerful than the local indigenous population. And of course, in the name of democracy, it's all, again, window dressing. It means that by this supposedly legitimate democratic process, in reality, all you're doing is you're flooding the region with your own people so that they then vote their representatives into power, and the indigenous people's voice gets diluted, gets crowded out, and they essentially end up becoming a minority and ultimately are just driven out. That is what is happening across northwest India. And of course, this election has just been the next step in this essential colonisation of another region of India, again rolling out the Hindu Rashtra. Meanwhile, results from elections in Haryana, that's the state just north of New Delhi, were also released yesterday. In those polls, Modi's BJP was leading the opposition Congress. And among the newly elected state legislators was the recently retired star wrestler Vinesh Phogat, standing for Congress. Last year, she took part in protests against the then National Wrestling Federation chief, who faced accusations of sexual harassment. James, unfortunately, yes, once again, a link to the dreadful treatment of women across India. So that is as an afterthought. But yeah, here we go, James. This is the Kashmir elections. A lot of window dressing going on. In reality, this once again is Narendra Modi's BJP India. This is the so-called democratic, the largest democracy in the world. India, in reality, is just window dressing. It's fake democracy. When it comes down to what's really happening on the ground, no, I don't see much genuine democracy going on. This is democracy RSS style.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for somebody that has cancer and you put a Band-Aid on it to try to cover it up so you can't see it. I mean, that's essentially what's happening, is that the BJP, the way that they are taking control and removing rights and historic commitments, I mean, that's just a disease to the problem that's ongoing and, of course, increasing. So they seem to be moving in the wrong direction towards a true democracy. And if they want to be a superpower, if they want to be a developed country, they've got to really start taking a look at how they are handling this situation within their politics, within their communities, and within their country. I mean, it's just not acceptable the way that they are dealing with it at this time.
And when you look at the bigger picture here, I mean, ultimately, India, as we often refer to, and many of my podcast guests have said this, is that India is still effectively colonialised. It is still colonised by the Brahmins, by the RSS, who essentially just took over from the British. So the British colonised India and then handed the reins of the colony over to the Brahmins, which means that you have all these diverse cultures and peoples and communities right across India who are really not very happy with this colonisation. I mean, they managed to throw off the British rulers, but they've ended up for 70 odd years now with the Brahmin rulers. So nothing has changed for many people in India. And essentially all the RSS are achieving at the moment is that they're managing to keep the colonialised India together by a hair's breadth. But ultimately all they are doing, even with this patina, this surface of democracy, but underneath that surface is a lot of very unhappy, diverse communities who at the first opportunity want to throw off this yoke of colonialisation. They want to throw off this Brahmin control of India. Now, the Hindus are obviously very happy. The majority of Hindus, on the whole, seem to be happy with the society that they live in, despite the fact that most of them are slaves under the caste system, but that's their own problem. But ultimately, we have places like J&K and the Punjab, Tamil Nadu, and all these other parts, Manipur, and all these diverse areas right across India, who ultimately are not happy. Ladakh is another area, again, that has its own independence movement. All these movements are never going to go away. This is the harsh reality that the Brahmins and the RSS can never get rid of. That all these parts of India ultimately will only ever be happy when they are running their own regions themselves. They have got self-determination and they become autonomous. And ultimately, and again I look at the bigger picture, we look at the Soviet Union, we look at East Europe, all these places that it took decades of essential colonialisation. The Soviet Union, again, is a prime example of this. It was this enormous colonialisation of Eastern Europe and Russia. And it was imposed by force and it was kept under control by force. But ultimately, people power won in the end, as it always has done throughout history. Ultimately, you cannot beat people power. People always win in the end, and this is what will happen in India. Now, whether it happens in 6 months or 6 years, it will ultimately happen. Khalistan, we keep talking about, will happen again because you cannot beat the demands and the desire of people. You can only keep control for a certain period of time, but ultimately the cracks start appearing, and as I often say, it just takes one catalytic event and those dominoes start falling, James. So I sense here that the J&K, these elections, again, it's just a symptom of a deeper problem. Things are going to change across India in the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. And it's a lot less isolation now with the advent and the commonplace of technology, that people are actually getting together. They are communicating outside of their own little towns, and they're finding out that they're not the only ones that are just fed up, and that, this helps to build the opportunity for people to speak out and have their voices heard. And that's what's going to ultimately happen.
Indeed, and of course, one of the big tools that totalitarian regimes always turn to in trying to control their population is misinformation and manipulating the truth. And we'll come on to the truth is a big topic in our comment section today, which we'll come on to, of course, shortly. But you cannot change the truth. The truth always prevails, and you can do whatever you want to try and hide that truth, but it always comes out in the end. So my second story, which I'll move on to now, is talking about the truth, and the truth of the 1980s and 1990s of Punjab. And of course, our audience are fully aware of what happened across that period of time. The world was made aware of what happened in the 1980s and 1990s, particularly through a gentleman called Jaswant Singh Khalra, the martyr, the Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra. Now, as we reported on recently, there is this biopic, this film that's been put together about his life and about his story. He, of course, collated a huge amount of evidence of the guilty behind the genocide, the murder, the mass murder of Sikh youth right across the Punjab in the 1980s and 90s. He brought that to the attention of the West. He stood up in the Canadian Parliament in the 1980s, the 1990s, and made the West aware of what India had been up to, this genocide that had been perpetrated against a whole people in the 1980s and 90s. As a result, he was murdered by Indian police when he returned to India. Now, this biopic that's been put together, this film has been put together to tell his story in great detail. And unfortunately, of course, the Indian state, in its usual strategy, has decided to completely bury this story. It's an uncomfortable truth, yet this truth will prevail. I predict it will prevail. But they are doing their absolute utmost in the manner of all very good totalitarian regimes. They will do everything they can that is in their power to suppress the truth. So they, through the Indian Central Board of Film Certification, the CFBC, have demanded that this film essentially be buried, be destroyed through a process of cuts. And as we reported in the past, they have when this film was put by the filmmakers to the censor board to say, will you please pass this film and give it a certificate so it can be released, the censor board demanded originally demanded 85 cuts from the film that they then increased to 120. And then they escalated this, and they demanded that the renaming of the key character, Jaswant Singh Khalra, he be renamed something else, which seems a bit of a strange thing. Bear in mind, it is the story of Jaswant's life. But they demanded his name be changed. Worse still, they demanded that they drop the name of the film, Punjab95. Yeah, that's the year that Khalra was murdered by Indian police. They demand that the film's name be changed. Why? Because once again, they're trying to bury the truth of what happened. They're trying to hide the fact of what happened to Khalra from its audience because they're scared. They are terrified of more people discovering and finding out what the Indian state got up to in 1995 and the years that led up to that. And of course, yes, they want to change his name. They talk about any references to the district of where much of this happened, the Taran area and the Punjab, the whole story, the whole name of the Punjab be dropped. In other words, they want essentially this whole film to be completely rewritten so it becomes a complete and utter work of fiction, which rather flies in the face of the point of this film. Anyway, as a result of all this, Khalra's family has written a letter, a public letter which has been broadcast, has essentially been issued as a press release. It's been written by Khalra's wife, Paramjit Kaur, his daughter, Navkaran Kaur Khalra, and his son, Janmeet Singh Khalra. And it was written to the CBFC, that's the film board, to the filmmakers and to Sikh institutions. And the letter, of course, has been circulated on X, and it reads as follows, and I'll quickly run through this. Over 3 years ago, Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra's family, we read a film script on the life and work of Khalra and give our permission to Mr. Honi Trahan to direct this film, with Diljit Dosanjh playing the lead role. As was promised to us, the makers showed us the completed film, titled Punjab95 last year, for our final go-ahead. We were pleased to see the film uphold the legacy of Khalra with respect and sensitivity. Most importantly, it depicted an important time in the history of the Punjab. Shaheed Khalra's struggle and his fight for human rights was shown with honesty and without any political motivation. He was and remains an inspiration to people of all backgrounds, cultures, faiths. The film was well researched and stayed true to the facts and details mentioned in official documents. That's why it's so dangerous. That is why the Indian government are terrified of this film, because it depicts the truth. However, recently we've become aware that the film board has issued 120 cuts and changes to the film, including even changing Khalra's name, removing Gabani, removing all reference to extrajudicial killing numbers, and changing the real dates and names of places where real recorded events took place. It's deeply disconcerting. And it goes on, the events depicted in the film are publicly available and in the court documents, they're proved there. We fail to understand why the government wants to change the real facts and events, which are mentioned in the judgments of the High Court and the Supreme Court, and in the reports of the National Human Rights Commission of India. Well, I think to us and our audience, it's pretty obvious why. We're also following the High Court case 1 year ago between the producers of the film. We are hopeful that the film will find justice in court. But over 1 year's passed and still nothing has happened. Oh, James, there's a familiar story. The delay of justice. Yeah, here we go again. The Indian government.
Years down the road, Angus.
Absolutely. We've been here before. Indian justice serves justice only for the Indian government. Anybody who's against the Indian government doesn't seem to find justice. What a surprise here. And they continue, we have heard that the producers have been told to comply with the CBFC and the makers even tried to do that, but the list of cuts and changes has only grown with no end in sight. Here we go again. They're delaying it. They are killing this film through delays. We appeal to the film board to use not to use rampant censorship to attempt to change the proven facts. We request the producers stay true to the integrity of the film and the story of Shaheed Jaswant Singh Khalra. We, the Khalra family, also remain steadfast in our earlier reserved legal right to review the final film before the final go-ahead. As the facts and events depicted in Punjab95 have to do with a sensitive time in the history of Punjab, we would like to request, if possible, the honourable members of the SGPC and Sri Akal Takht Sahib watch the film, provide their valuable input and opinion. We respect and stand by the director's vision and the portrayal of Jaswant Singh Khalra by Diljit Dosanjh. We hope this issue is resolved as soon as possible and urge that the film be released in its original form. Now, I think really my opinion on this, James, is it's very unlikely this film is ever going to be released in India. Why? It's pretty obvious. This film is a powerful, hugely powerful propaganda piece, but a propaganda piece that will have a huge impact, positive impact, by spreading the truth. This film needs to be released because it will reach an audience and it will explain to the audience what happened in the Punjab in the 1980s and 1990s. It was an absolute travesty of justice and democracy that happened in the Punjab at that time. It is a disgusting stain on Indian history that must never be forgotten, must be reminded on a regular basis, and must be sent out to the world to educate the world. This is what India did in that time. This is what India is trying to bury and hide. This is what India refuses to face up to. This is Indian justice failing once again. This is why this film must be released in its original form, and if it will not be released in India, which it damn well should be, it should be released right across film festivals across the world, which I believe it will be. And a huge audience must be essentially encouraged to go watch this film so that they can be educated about what happened and what happened to this man, the Shaheed Khalra, who had an incredible story, incredibly brave guy of what he did. And his story needs to be told, and the bigger story needs to be told, James. So yeah, I think unfortunately it's unlikely this film will ever be passed in India because it tells too much of the truth. It tells too much of an uncomfortable truth, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And something I've said time and time and again, that the sins of the father are not necessarily the sins of the son. And in this regard, I think that what I'm saying is that, we can look at history. We can look at the mistakes. We can look at the tragedies. We can look at the horrific events and learn from them. But when you take it to a point now where you're still trying to bury the truth and you're trying to hide the truth, that no longer is the sin of the father. That becomes the sin of the current regime or the so-called son. And that's where it really is at an impasse because of the fact that they are perpetrating that this didn't happen, that this is got to be covered up. They got to change names, dates, locations, and try to make it seem like it's just another Hollywood, sort of movie that's made up but this is reality. This is the truth. This is history. And people need to know to learn from it and make sure it's not repeated again down the road. And that's essentially what they're trying to do. They're trying to prevent people from learning about the history and the horrific events of the past.
Yeah, and I know it's easy for us to say, but my advice to the filmmakers, and this makes very little commercial sense, unfortunately, of course they have a living to make, but keep that film in its original form, make no cuts to it, and then release it on the underground. Release it globally through the film festivals, because of course you can get it certified. I don't know much about it, but I'm sure you can get it certified elsewhere outside of India. Release it on the film festivals. But then release it on the internet, release it on the underground, because as soon as a film is banned, human psychology means that sheer curiosity will mean people will deliberately seek it out. And then it will get disseminated. This is the beauty of the internet. It will then get disseminated around India, and people across India will then get to see the film, albeit on the underground, in the underground. There are ways and means, as we often point out, there are ways to find these things through VPNs and things. So don't be bullied, don't be cowed by the Indian government. Get this film out there in its original form. Just all bets off now, guys. Remove all the cuts, put it out in its original form, and then spread it out in the public domain across the internet. It will go viral, I have no doubt. That's easy for me to say.
Yeah, and what they could do is find an international distributor to partner up with, so that the international distributor takes on the liability because they're outside of the boundaries and the control and restrictions of India. So they can do the distribution on the international level to all regions with the exception of India. But at the same time, once it hits a streaming platform or on the underground online, of course, they're going to be able to see it if they're watching through a VPN or, Angus, changing the country settings in their cell phone.
Absolutely, we know that trick now. We certainly do. And the marketing for this film writes itself. This is the film banned in India. Who wouldn't want to go see that if you're out in the wider world? It's a marketer's dream. There's a huge amount of publicity that can be generated. This is the film that was banned. This is the film that India did not want you to see. Again, the strap lines write themselves. So there you go, filmmakers. Get that film out there. Don't be cowed by the Indian government. Remove the cuts, get it out there in the original format. Easy for us to say, James. But let's move on. Let's move on now to some brighter, more positive news and things. And a quick rundown of a couple of events happening across the world, across the diaspora, that's worth making our audience aware of. If you are in California, as I know many of our audience are, the Jakara movement have announced what they call a mega march, spanning across over. We'll get your walking boots on 350 miles of California, where Sikhs from across the state are invited to go from Sacramento to Bakersfield to mark the 1984 genocide. So from October the 9th, I think that's today, good heavens, to November the 1st, join the Panth as they unite in solidarity with others and begin the Nurbau and Nia Morcha. That means Fearless for Justice March from Bakersfield to Sacramento on foot, building power and community along the way. They'll be walking along Highway 99, that's California's GT road, on this pathway made famous by our Mexican farm worker brothers and sisters in their fight for freedom and dignity. They'll be stopping among Sangats along the way, each night powering themselves through Shabad, Sangat and Seva with a feeling of Santok and inspired by our Shaheeds. On this momentous occasion, they ask you and your family to join them during the march and host them in your local community as the morcha approaches your city. They'll be working with partners, schools, elected officials and more. Join for the week, join for the weekend, and meet them in Sacramento. Every evening, join them at 6 o'clock in the evening with your family for kirtan, katha, art workshops, dadi jatha, legal health clinics, medical and health clinics, vichar conversations, and more. And the goals of the march within the community include Panthic unity, and despite the return of a price on a Sikh's head, a recommitment to Guru Tech Bahadur's principle, Bhai Kahu Kau Det Nahi Nahi Bhai Manat Onil. Forgive my pronunciation, I have absolutely no idea if I pronounced that correctly. And
10 times faster.
I guess my Punjabi is improving by the day. And outside the community, the goals are, firstly, a call for the US Congress to recognise, of course, the events of November 1984 as a genocide, and the need to pass transnational repression and prevention laws at federal and state levels to ensure democratic protection of all US residents against foreign interference. So, in other words, get out there, get your walking boots on if you're in California. I know it's a pretty tough ask, 350 miles, James, but yeah, it's all obviously for a great cause. It's getting the visibility of the community out there. It's highlighting, of course, the events of 1984. It's all part of getting the knowledge out there, getting people in the community, other communities out there aware of what it's all about. So good luck to all you guys in California. Best of luck on that walk. And if you happen to be in California, yeah, why not get a bit of exercise, a bit of fresh air? Well, I don't know how fresh the air will be on what is it, Highway 99, but do stay safe as well, James. I guess you won't be joining them.
Absolutely. And if you happen to be taking part in this, we would love to see some photos or videos. Send us the photos or videos or links, and we may just show them on the program as the march progresses. We would love to be able to share the progress.
Absolutely, yeah, please do. If you're involved in that in any way, shape or form, even if you just stand by the side of the road to cheer the guys on, yeah, take some photos, send the photos through. We'd love to show them on the show. And also worth just reporting that this week is Langar week. All sorts of events have been happening across the diaspora, in the communities, lots of, particularly here in the UK, I know there have been lots of wonderful events where this wonderful concept of Langar has been rolled out across lots of events this week. So again, if you're involved in that, do send us some photos, do send us any footage of it. Well done to all the people involved in those. Well done to the communities who've been setting up events across the UK and across the wider diaspora on those. So there we have it, James. Let's move on now as time marches on. Let's move on to our comments section for today. And first comment of the day comes after, again, it's the Inderjit Singh discussion I had where we talked a lot about the coming of Khalistan, the official steps underway that the Sikh Federation have been putting in place globally, that's been initiated by the UK Sikh Federation, but of course it is now rolling out globally. And Paramjit Mangat has very kindly made this lovely comment referencing the interview. Thank you for your comment, Paramjit. You actually watched the convention as it was being aired. In fact, yes, as I reported at the time, it was aired across the internet, had a huge global audience, which is fantastic. Had a great turnout locally. I think over 10,000 people attended it here in the UK, in the Midlands in the UK. They actually attended the event in person, which is a great turnout. It shows the huge support that the convention had here domestically, but of course it was broadcast across the internet globally, and again had a massive internet audience as well. So Paramjit was of course amongst that, and Paramjit says that he is so proud how the Sikh Federation is moving forward with things that are of course so important to the population and the community across the globe. Now, you grew up in England but now reside in Canada, James, so a resident over in your neck of the woods. I love listening to your podcast. It is an absolute pleasure, and we do enjoy doing them. And I think you've raised a good point here. The Sikh Federation are doing sterling work. They're doing fantastic work. And we've often talked, James, about the fragmentation of the Sikh community across the diaspora, and particularly in the Punjab. Again, part of a deliberate campaign and an agenda by the RSS to deliberately try and break up and fragment the community, because the community is so powerful when it is united. And of course, the only way to weaken that power is to fragment it. So we are seeing this huge momentum gathering force now amongst the community where it is uniting, particularly behind the Sikh Federation. And they are uniting all the disparate parts of the community into one united voice. And it is that united voice that is going to take the Khalistan movement forward, that is going to make Khalistan happen. So, James, I would say great news, and it's rolling out in Canada next.
Absolutely. And by all means, if you're out in my neck of the woods at any of the events, come up and say hello by all means. And I'll bet you one thing that he has fun with, Angus, is that if he has the British accent, it's always funny because a lot of Canadians don't realize how much of a population of Sikhs and other cultures are in England and in, Europe. And when they go to speak, everybody's expecting the Indian or the Punjabi accent. And when they open their mouth and they start talking, they've got that amazing British accent. It just blows people away and just shocks the shit out of them. So it's always funny to watch facial expressions.
Indeed, you can't beat a good British accent. Right, moving on. Hardile made a comment about Chanda Arya, that's his name, Jez. You can talk about him in a moment. Yeah, referring to him as a traitor and having double standards. Action should be taken against him. Shame. Well, yeah, we talked about him, James, a few days ago. I don't know if he's done enough to have any action taken against him, but he clearly is an RSS plant, or at least a placeman of the RSS, and he's quite potentially, he's a threat to the community, is he not?
Well, and we also have to keep in mind that, under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the same laws and protections that allow the protests and the referendums and the support for Khalistan movement are the same laws and protections that give him the right to speak his mind and share his opinions, regardless as to how wrong they may be or how much we disagree with them. So as you were just saying, Angus, there's a balance there between when he's actually breaking a law or committing treason or things like that. So it's a delicate balance between that and free speech, and it's the same freedoms that protect all of us to be able to speak our minds and to have the right to express ourselves.
Yes, I think that is absolutely right. Freedom of speech really trumps everything else. It is the most important philosophy that must always be upheld. Even if you totally disagree with the other person, they must have a right to speak up. And and I think it could fall into that. But I often refer to this new battleground. The new battleground is, of course, the democratic field, the field of democracy. And what has to be done, of course, the RSS now have realised this to a large degree. So they are pouring their resources into getting their elected representatives into power so that they can dominate this battlefield, this democratic battlefield, so that the RSS voices are the ones dominating that field. And this is where our community, where the Sikh community, must really work extremely hard to get their representatives into positions of power, to get their voices into the democratic arena, to get their elected representatives into parliaments, into councils. Your local political infrastructure must have Sikh voices, because otherwise they will get drowned out perfectly legally under the democratic process. That your voices will just get drowned out. So it is really important that, again, in this democratic battleground, that the Sikh community must get as many representatives elected as possible, because otherwise you will lose this battle, or this war indeed. So Amrit Saravar makes this wonderful comment. James, you guys will be two of the prominent media personalities of Khalistan. We're going to be celebrities in Khalistan, James.
Well, there you go. I don't know if I'd want to leave BC, no offense, but, I've got the ocean, I've got the mountains, I've got, all the family, everything's beautiful here, but I would definitely come and spend time in Khalistan without a doubt.
Well, give us a nice shiny new studio up there in the beautiful countryside of Khalistan. Who knows what could happen?
I'll have to probably my time 50-50.
We will see you there. So thank you, Amrit, for that comment. Hat B says, could they look into Indian government involvement in the murders of lawyer, actor, activist Deep Sidhu and Sidhu Moosewala? They were strong voices indeed during that farmers' protest and were quickly murdered. Their murders have not been properly investigated. Huge holes in their stories. Yeah, well, this is a difficult one. Deep Sidhu, if I've got these the right way around, I think Deep Sidhu was, he was an actor. And of course, he was a very pro-Khalistan activist. And he was killed, I believe, in a car accident. And I think the details are something like he allegedly ran into the back of a parked truck on a highway. And I think his girlfriend was in the car and she survived, but he was killed. And of course, being a Khalistani activist, and he was very vocal. and of course a very influential figure, and therefore by definition a huge threat to the RSS agenda. Likewise, Sidhu Moosewala, he was a rap artist, I believe, and he was again a very influential figure. Of course, being a music figure, a lot of people bought his records. That's very old-fashioned. Bought his or downloaded his music as whatever it is people do these days. Showing my age there, James. And but of course, he was a hugely influential figure, and of course, again pro-Khalistani. But he was very much involved in this sort of rap culture, which is of course linked to gangs and crime and gun violence. And of course, I believe he was very much an advocate of guns to some degree. And of course, then again, he's attracting attention of the Indian government. He was again a Khalistani, and of course, therefore, by definition, a huge threat to the RSS. So it does raise these conspiratorial theories that maybe these two guys were murdered because they were a threat. I don't know, is my answer to this. There are holes in both their stories, but there also, at the same time, there is an equal balance of possibility that they actually were genuinely killed by Sidhu Moosewala by gang violence. It does happen. And Deep Sidhu, it may literally just have been a car accident. Of course, they are unfortunately very common in India. I don't know, James, but yeah, it's very easy to speculate here.
Absolutely, Angus. And I mean, we've seen it here even in Canada with the Punjabi singer that lives on Vancouver Island that had his house shot up there, what was it, about a month ago. So, yeah, we do see it. And that is reportedly because he had a collaboration with someone who a large gang that has ties to India had some kind of a dispute with, and it carried over to this artist who collaborated with one person that was attached to this person. And, you know, you just don't know. It just, there's so many tentacles going into the head of the octopus that it's hard to trace sometimes.
Indeed. And I think none of these theories are ever going to go away. Speculation will always be there because, of course, of who these two guys were. But the reality, unfortunately, the practical reality is I think expecting justice in India for this is deeply unlikely because, again, as James and I often say and report, is that justice is painfully, glacially slow in India, and particularly anything that could potentially investigate the Indian state, and the Indian state's involvement is never even going to get off the ground. So I think it's very unlikely that we will ever see justice, or certainly an investigation into the deaths of either of these figures. So certainly not whilst the RSS are in control of India. Now, when Khalistan happens, that could be a very different story. But until then, I think it's unfortunately most unlikely. Jaspal Chatterful says they don't need to burn flags. They should just remain focused on the goal of independence. Well, yeah, I think this is a school of thought here. Burning flags is a very common tactic across protests across the world. We see it right across the world. I think every nation has had its flag burnt by somebody in a protest in the past somewhere. Is it a productive use of petrol and polyester flags, James? I don't know. What do you think?
No, and I am one that's against flag burning. I've said it before that I feel that a flag represents all people of that nation. So regardless as to the good, the bad, whatever, I feel that a flag represents all people included as one. So I don't like flag burning. I saw at McGill University, pro-Palestinian protesters today were burning flags and smashing windows out of the historic buildings. And it pissed me off. Just plain simple, It pissed me off. So at the same time, if you're a protester and you're trying to get under somebody's skin, I guess that's the way to do it, because it sure worked with me today when I saw that.
Yeah, it is. And we've always said it is an extremely emotive thing to do. It really, it's going to upset anybody who falls under that flag, which of course is their desired intention. Yeah. But I think this point is quite valid. The goal of independence will come easier if you've got more people on side, and that could include Hindus within India. And of course, those Hindus in India fall under the Indian flag, the Indian tricolour. And they, if they're seeing their flag burnt, they're going to become less sympathetic to the overall concept of Khalistan. And we do think, and many of our commenters have even said, that they believe many Hindus within India, and of course other faiths, will be attracted to the whole concept of Khalistan. They will want to move, to relocate to Khalistan because, of course, everything that it stands for. But they, at the moment, still associate themselves with that Indian flag. And I think burning the Indian flag is going to put them on the wrong side of your argument. So yeah, I think Jaswant has a very valid point here, James, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. So yeah, a good comment, that one. Hardal again comes back, talks about Chandra Araya, yes, another commenter, again saying action should be taken. Unfortunately, well, we'll cover that one already, so I won't go into it again. But, well, freedom of speech, I don't think there's very much that we can do against him, unfortunately. Minder Singh says, listening to the truth. Oh, now here we go. This is the truth will prevail section, as I like to call it. We've talked about the truth already. Minder Singh says, listening from Australia, welcome to you in Australia, and welcome to all those listening or watching us from Australia. In regards to vandalism in Melbourne and other areas, police provided the information to the public that it was self-inflicted by Hindus. So the only problem is that time can be an issue, as the truth takes time to come out. Truth will prevail, absolutely. And again, you're referring to the false flag events, these Hindu temples that have been graffitied allegedly by Khalistani terrorists. In reality, it's been brought out by Australian police that in fact when they investigated these things, that quite often it's actually been by Hindu activists themselves, false flag things trying to stain the local Sikh community. And as you rightly say, Minder Singh, the truth does take time to come out, but it always comes out in the end, James, does it not?
Absolutely. Just like those claims by India that there were grenades thrown over the High Commission walls in Ottawa during protests that never, and I repeat, never happened.
And Amrit comes up with the same point again, but in a different context. The Brahmins are playing this game of false fake complaints against Sikhs, even in Mughal times and the British Raj. Our gurus have taught us to walk on the path of the truth. We will win. Khalistan Zindabad. And again, absolutely, all these comments have this common theme that the truth will prevail. And Sam Singh, the same. They will use every deceitful tactics, but truth remains the truth. And this is the inescapable fact that the RSS and the Brahmins, the BJP, all of them will one day learn to their cost. The truth will remain the truth. The truth will prevail. It doesn't matter how much you try and bury this. The truth always comes out in the end. And Universal wraps up by saying, Hindustani means thief. Oh dear, we're back to the anti-Hindus again. And these thieves have robbed the Punjab from us and now think it belongs to them. But we will take it back. The time's not far now. Khalistan Zindabad, James.
And again, we can't wait to go and visit Khalistan, the independent nation, Angus.
Absolutely, and we look forward to that very day, and I think it may be coming sooner than we realise. But as we have said, the truth will prevail. Khalistan Zindabad. And on that note, we will wrap up the show for today. But thank you once again for all your comments. Do keep them coming in. As we always say, we do love reading them. We love talking about them. So do send us your thoughts, your comments, your corrections if we get things wrong, and of course anything that you'd like to highlight and bring to our attention. And of course, any emotional issues that you feel passionate about, get them in the comments. We do like to talk about them. We like to understand what drives your own thought process. And of course, you can message us directly if you don't want to put it in the public domain at message@satellitetv.com. And we've had lots of interesting, fabulous emails as well, which we will, in fact, bring up on future shows. So thank you for those. But in the meantime, we must wrap things up for Perspectives for another day. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.